All right, so a lot of opportunity out there, few obstacles, obviously. It feels like we've been through a lot the last few years. I'd love to just have this conversation on kind of where we're seeing things now. Chris, I'd love to kind of get your perspective on kind of what you're seeing as far as agents out there, opportunities, some of the obstacles maybe.
Yeah, I think the one thing that's really interesting is every year NAR puts out what they call kind of their generational report. And there's always great data in it every single year. But what someone had a really good idea, one of our peers, to what's changed over the last 5 years, right? So we went back and looked at the 2019 report compared to the 2025 report. And 2019 is a good year because it's pre the COVID craze, before the market got kind of wacky and out of balance, one way or the other. And what we found is there's been some consistency there. And the two things that really stood out to me is from 2019 to 2025, the one thing that's still happening is the vast majority of consumers are still interviewing one agent. So that importance of when you have the opportunity to sit down with a consumer, that matters so much, because as long as you bring the great content you're putting out and you have that local expertise and that market knowledge that you're always talking about, you have like a 80% chance of that client, that consumer is going to go with you. The other thing that really stood out to me too that hasn't changed over the last 5 years is that this kind of myth sometimes that the younger the consumer, the more likely they're to gravitate towards not working with a professional. Oh, they want to do everything on a phone, a tablet, or whatever. It just doesn't bear out in the numbers. And so when they ask consumers by age cohort, will you use a real estate professional in your next transaction? The highest demographic to say yes to that question is 25 to 34. It's 90%. It actually gets less the older the consumers. It only drops to like 86%, right? So they're all using one. But this whole idea is, and I think what's happened is we've given them so much information at their fingertips, they still need that professional that helps make sense of it. So this idea that somehow the value that you've traditionally brought as an agent is somehow diminished on a younger consumer it just doesn't bear out in the numbers. And I think that's really reassuring for the value that we bring, especially in today's market.
Yeah, I agree. And David, I think referencing back to 2019, and kind of let's talk about where we are right now, if you don't mind, on what are we seeing, obviously trend-wise, and some things that we want to make sure agents recognize and they can communicate about.
Sure. No, I think it's a great question. 2019, I always call that the last normal year in real estate. But I think you're right. In younger generations, certainly bears out in surveys that they want professional advice. Now, it's interesting. It was at an event yesterday, literally talking to an agent, and she said, I like to ask the question to my sellers, has someone educated you on the market? And she said, overwhelmingly, and I think it's true for everyone, the answer to that is no. When you're sitting down with a seller, they haven't been educated on the market. And if you were to ask me what trends are sort of taking place right now in real estate, it's not super complicated to understand it. You have to have access to it, and both of you do a great job in that and in sharing that. But inventory is rising, right? I'm not telling anybody anything they don't know right now. But here's the interesting thing, and I can show this graphic, and we can kind of weave it into here. If you look at the inventory depletion over the last 5 years, this will really be the year that we come back. We'll end this year in active inventory in this country around where we ended 17, 18, and 19 from a volume standpoint. So it's really, COVID comes along, everybody jumps into the market, we deplete inventory, price shoots up, and we're coming through that in sort of a 5-year cycle of real estate. So I think it's helping sellers and buyers understand inventory is coming back, rising in just about every market. It's having an effect on price for sure. We're seeing a rise in there are a number of listings that have a price cut on them, the number of listings that are expiring right now because they were priced out of the market. And those dynamics have kind of, dominated the summer market right now. And I think kind of to your point, people want the advice, and taking 5 or 10 minutes and saying, this is what's happening right now in our market is the key to showing people that this is what you can expect and set that expectation.
Yeah. Hey, speaking of setting expectations, I think it's a great point. It's sliding in here. I think one of our biggest jobs as an industry is giving that education on kind of where we are. You want to speak to some of that as well?
Well, we were talking before we started filming here about the Realtor.com study that came out, and I'd love for you to share a little bit about that as well. Sellers' expectations versus sellers' reality, and kind of the disparity between the two. Because that comes back to what our job is as real estate professionals when we get
Sure. I think there are a couple of things that I would recommend or say that everybody should understand right now in this country. One, we're undersupplied in the number of homes for the number of people that want to buy a home. Now they can't right now because of affordability, because of the rise in price and the rise in mortgage rates. But anybody that measures it, we're undersupplied by about 2 to 3 million units. But given the constraints on affordability, what it's caused is it's caused an imbalance in the market where you have more sellers than you have buyers. Literally, because I've presented this a couple of times, I know the numbers. 20%, and we're recording this here, the last month, 20% of the homes in this country had a price adjustment. You go out to Arizona, that number is 29%. Mm-hmm. So different variations, but then NAR did a study that you were talking about where 8 out of 10 sellers think they'll get their asking price or more. Right? And they think, well, the house sold down the street 6 or 8 months ago for this. There's no way it's worth that, right? We should get this. And it's just not bearing out in a shifting market. And that's where we have to come in and say, okay, here are the dynamics that, and I did this at an event literally yesterday. We're talking after an event where if you will go in right now, here's something I would encourage everybody to do inside your MLS. Look at the number of active listings and look at the number of listings that have had a price cut. It'll shock you, right? Because we're coming out of a market where there weren't price cuts. Right. And those are the dynamics that sellers have to understand right now if they're serious about selling their house.
And so, Jimmy, on that point, because so often a seller is thinking, to David's point, what happened 12 months ago, my neighbor down the street, kind of thing. What are some of the tips that you suggest to agents when they're going in to have that conversation? Because let's all admit it, we're a little rusty on the price reduction conversation or price adjustment conversation, right? So what are the types of things that you're kind of advising on? Is it bringing some of that data, some of the points? Like, what's the most effective way to have that conversation when a seller may not even be thinking that it's in the realm of possibility they'd have to consider that?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the education. I mean, we use a ton of, obviously, what KCM's putting out as far as showing the national data. The local data is where it gets really important, though, and showing those numbers. I mean, obviously, it's pretty much supply and demand. As you explain this to folks, I mean, look, we've got more supply than we've had, and we've got less transactions, which is less demand. So consequently, what do you think is going to happen here? And so what we do with the price reduction, because it's a very specific conversation. Look, even the seasoned agents that haven't done this in years, there's a little bit of atrophy, I guess you could say. They haven't done this, so the muscle has been. Yeah. And so what I've always been talking to people about right now really is we utilize it where we say, hey, listen, I want to talk to you about something where I need you to do one thing, but it unlocks the opportunity for us to do 15 things. And so basically what we're doing is we're preparing a relaunch of the marketing plan. And we say, hey, look, in order to do this, and we want to be strategic with this, in order to do this, we're going to need to do a price improvement here. Obviously, the market is telling us this. And what it does is it gives me the opportunity to unlock 15 additional things I can do. A couple things we're going to do is we're going to strategically do this, and you need to find this out in your local area. In our area, we know Thursdays, and it's in most markets, Thursdays are the most active day on search for most markets. In that case, we're going to strategically relaunch this price reduction on Thursday morning at 10 a.m. It's going to do a couple things. Number one is every search portal has an area for new listings and price reductions. We want to be at the top of the list when we have the most traffic, and that's going to give us a 48-hour period to be on that list, which carries us through our second busiest day in our area, which is Friday, and then into the Monday or Saturday morning coffee time that people are just kind of scrolling through looking at properties. The next thing it's going to do is we're going to utilize AI to rewrite everything we can on this. We're going to rewrite the description on the house. We're going to rewrite all of our social media posts where we're relaunching this listing. So we go through these 15 things. I'm not going to go through them all. But basically what we need to do is you don't need to go to the seller with just, you need to reduce your price. First off, you're going to get tons of resistance. That is you almost have to tenderize it by showing the data and then saying, hey, look, we're heading in this direction. Yeah. And pre-doing that in this market is the best thing you can do in the listing cycle. When you're at the listing appointment saying, hey, look, we're going to be here, but as you can see, if we get this happens where we don't have showings or we don't get any offers and we had 10 showings, the market is telling us that we may need to improve this price. So have it up front, have a strategic plan, go in with a plan and not just with you need to reduce your price. It's almost like when David and I was at the event yesterday, we had an agent that said, the question they asked us was, how do you go in and tell someone that their house or their child is ugly?
Yeah.
And it's a great question. Yeah. So it needs to be, you don't do that.
Diplomatically.
Diplomatically is a great way.
Well, the way that you do that, there is a way to do it. And it's using facts in the market, because anytime you use facts, it becomes, it's not my opinion versus your opinion, it's your opinion versus the facts, right? And so in any market, when you see a rise in inventory, you start to see price being cut, and growing, then you have to pay attention to that, right? You can't just go out, and I think it goes back to motivation of a seller or even a buyer in this market. Like, I'll say this, I've had a chance, we were talking about it, to speak at a number of different events this year, grateful for it. But I'll say this usually, and I haven't had somebody come up to me and say, well, that's wrong here, is if a home is priced right, it's selling quickly in just about every market.
Correct.
Things that are staying on market are out of line price-wise. And I think it's bearing in all the numbers.
Yeah, and that goes into that conversation. I think there's a lot of properties as we see the swelling of this. There's a lot of properties that are on the market, but they're not in the market, if that makes sense. So we've got a very big difference there. And the properties that are in the market are still selling. There's still demand. There's still transactions happening every day. So it's, if this is, this kind of goes back to what we were talking about before, was the concept of, are you committed? Or just interested?
Yeah.
You want to speak to that a little bit, Dave? And obviously,
well, this is another thing that I've just noticed. There are a lot of, you walk into a room of agents today in this market, and there are clearly people that are winning, and there are clearly people that are losing. And I don't mean that disrespectfully, but you talk to people, and we all know agents and people listening to this that are saying, I'm having the best year of my career. Right? And you have somebody over here that's saying, I'm struggling. What I've noticed is people that are having the best year of their career are committed to the activities, to the social, to a video, to conversations, whatever it is, whatever their strategy is, to phone calls. Those that are interested generally will say something like this, I know I need to be more active. I know I need to, We had this conversation yesterday, and I think in this market, being the educator, being active and committed is clearly winning for a lot of folks.
And we see that almost anytime there's a shift in the market. And it's not just real estate, right? Like retailers that are slow to adapt to where the consumer is today versus 10 years ago start losing, right? Any industry. And so when you look at that, the agents that are adapting to that change, what are some of the things that you see beyond, you had mentioned, they're on social, they're doing this. One of the charts you shared I thought was really interesting was the seller expectation versus the buyer expectation, and there's that gap there.
Sure.
This is a really big opportunity for us in the industry right now. Like 3 or 4 years ago, let's be honest, right, it wasn't that difficult. If you had a listing, you had a sale.
Right.
This is the opportunity for us to shine as professionals, not just someone who puts a sign in the yard.
Sure. I think what's winning right now is the confident professional that says, I know what's happening. Right? They're using information in their market and saying, this is what I see happening. And the word that I would use here that is happening is they're consistent. They don't just get in and kind of go, well, I did that video, or I did a post, and so I'm good. They're consistent in what they're doing and bringing great information to the market. It's obviously Keeping Current Matters. We deal in market-based information. Believe you should be the expert. It's not all that, right? But they have a good mix, and they are consistent, and they are the voice. I'll tell you something interesting. This last year was the first presidential election cycle that podcasters had more influence than media. And we should notice that as in our business and as agents, that we can have more influence in how people consume and understand what's happening in our business than turning on the news or opening up news in an app. And we have that opportunity. And I'll guarantee you in the stuff that we do, you post something about home prices, people are interested, right? We work in a business where everybody has an opinion about what's happening. You talk about mortgage rates, people are interested there. So there's things that you can do to say, hey, here's what I see happening. And I think if you're listening to this, going even back into Facebook or into a social media feed of yours and saying, if I were to look at this, would I consider myself the expert?
That's good.
If I were to go back and look at what I'm posting and what I'm talking about, would I consider myself
Am I consistently here? Or just every 3 or 4 months I pop in with something and then I disappear again?
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about that. I'd love to hear from both of you, kind of what are we seeing pricing wise, or prices, what is happening nationwide. What are we seeing mortgage rates? If we don't get into those two areas, that's the two areas that people are always talking about. Dave, you want to kind of give us a little insight on that?
So let's maybe start with mortgage rates and then go to price. We've clearly been bouncing around 6.5% and 7%. I mean, I could show you the graphic and we can pop it up here where we can draw a channel and we've been right there. Most forecasts for the next year through the end of 26 have us somewhere between 6 and 6.5. So my message is we're not, I don't see anybody calling for us to dip down into the 5s. Certainly not going back to the 2 or 3s. I think most people...
And if that happens, something really terrible has happened that's further impacting the market.
Well, I'll tell a funny story. My son, their real estate club wanted me to speak at their deal, and the professor said, you're going to get this question from all the students, and the question's going to be, when are mortgage rates going to fall again? That's what they want to know. All these kids want to know. And she said, I know you don't have an answer, so don't worry about it, but I want you to know that's what they're going to ask. I said, I've got an answer. It's going to be a war or a pandemic.
Yeah.
And you don't want either one of those.
Correct.
And as consumers in the American economy, we don't want that either, because what that leads to is out of control inflation. Right. That's what housing is, such a massive piece of the U.S. economy. That's what leads to out of control inflation. So do I think we could dip our toe in the 5s in the next 12 to 18 months? I certainly do. And I will tell you this, from the consumers, sort of psychologically, if we do that, I think you'll see more people move back in the market, even if we get into the low 6s. But generally, forecasts for the next year are 6 to 6.5.
Yeah.
Now, that obviously, affordability is the biggest issue in American real estate. That's shown up in the velocity of real estate slowing down, which has an effect on price. So the most recent numbers, the top 50 markets in this country, 22 of them are down year over year. So people start to wonder, okay, is this where we're going? Now, most of those that are down 2 to 3%. Let's pump the brakes on this dramatic fall in price. And oh, by the way, the average home in this country in the last 5 years has gone up 55%.
Yeah, the doom and gloom want to show, here's what's happened over the last year. If you look over the last 5, you got it perspective.
Well, I can tell you, I'll tell you another thing. Everybody listening, you could state this confidently, is every city, every state in this country is up over the last 5 years.
Yeah.
Dramatically. And many of the cities that are down experienced more than, they were up 75%.
Correct. Austin would be an example. Yeah, if you had the most COVID boom, you're seeing a little bit more
completely.
of it. Yeah.
So and even if you look at the home price expectation survey, price appreciation for the next 5 years is very normal. 3.5%. And we should want that. The word that I would be using right now with anybody that I'm working with would be, we're entering a more healthy market, and we were in
sustainable.
A market.
Yeah,
completely.
Yeah. The other thing on mortgage rates, I think it's interesting, is because the talk has been for the last couple of years is this whole mortgage rate lock-in effect, right?
Yeah.
People with these low mortgages, will they get out? Even with a down cycle of home sales, right? There's still 4.1 million sales last year. It'll be about another 4.1 this year with existing home sales. So that rate lock-in effect, it doesn't end overnight unless you have one of those wars or pandemics and rates drop. It fades over time. So there's more people with a interest rate 6% or higher than at any time since 2016. Now, it's still a small percentage, but it is growing because every year, job relocation, empty nester, married, had children, there's still these life needs. Life finds a way in housing. It's not a purely economic decision. So each year we move forward, even with rates somewhere between 6 and 7%, life still finds a way. People are moving, and less people are tied to these artificially low rates that we all refinanced into or bought into, let's say from 2020 to mid 2022. Right, yeah. So there is that effect too, that it is growing to where that 6% kind of becomes the new normal over time. And that 3% is a distant memory. And it was a great time at the moment. And it's not just so much the rate, to David's point, it's the home price. It's the combination of both is the affordability challenge that we have.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest battles we have also is just the day we live in is the flash media is going to give the doom and gloom headline. It's just click-worthy. I think sometimes being able to educate on really where we are, and I thought, the gap where you're talking about the equity that is involved, can you share a little bit about kind of what we're seeing? Because, here, we're at a record amount of mortgage debt in America.
Sure.
And the reality is, yes, we are, but you want to share a little bit about that?
So I think the thing that I would understand about just the consumer's perspective right now, and any of us in this country, is debt's a problem. That is a fact in this country. The national debt, it's a problem. I don't care which side of the aisle that you're on. I don't think either political party has done a fair job of managing that. Consumer debt, car loan, boat loan, all that is at an all-time high. And oh, by the way, mortgage debt is at an all-time high. So debt in this country is an issue. Now, spoiler alert, mortgage debt's not the problem, but it will be used in that conversation, okay? But it is true that mortgage debt is higher than it's ever been before. Now, what's interesting is if you go back and look over the last 20 years, right now in the U.S. economy, residential real estate represents $48 trillion in value. Well, the equity on that value is just over 35 trillion. And then you have the balance of it being the debt on it. So if I were to graph this out, and we can show this, value goes up like this, equity goes up like this, and debt remains relatively flat. Gone up a little bit, you know what I mean? Kind of it was 10 million several years back, 13 million or trillion now. And so I think we just have to understand that we probably, and I've said this many times, probably live in the strongest, under the surface, the strongest real estate market of our lifetime. Yeah. And one thing that became very true post-COVID and post financial crisis in 2008 is people said we're going to do it differently. Yeah. We're not going to go out and do a cash out refi and go buy a jet ski and go on vacation or do whatever. We're going to do it differently because we saw our parents get hurt, we got hurt, whatever, saw a family member lose their home, whatever it is. Many of us in the business lost homes in that time. And generally, and everything I've learned in life is by doing something the wrong way, right? And so people said, we're going to do it differently. And so there's not, you couldn't make it, I'm sure you could make a case somewhere for a crash. I don't know what it is. Yeah. It'd have to involve aliens at some point or something, but it's not in the fundamentals of the housing market.
Correct.
Is my point.
Yeah, I think it's a great point because to your point, the clickbait stuff that talks about, they'll show one stat that's similar to 2000, the run up, let's say to 2007, 2008, rising prices, and that's the bubble. And I was like, yeah, but there was a debt bubble with that as well too and stuff.
Well, and I'll show this graphic. Yeah. So in this graphic, you go look at 2008, there was more debt in this country than equity in homes. And that's where the strategic default came into play, right? Yeah. We're walking away because we owe more on it than it's worth and we're done. Yeah. Right? And we know the story of that. Anybody that was in the business back then, even if you weren't in the business, you know the story of that. We're in a radically different place. Now, I mean, so if you take those numbers, you could say, okay, if residential real estate lost $10 trillion, you're still okay.
Correct.
I mean, there's just not this case.
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest difference when they talk about a crash. Like there you have to have forced selling, right? So even if, let's say I ran into an economic issue personally, a job loss, whatever it may be, I'm not walking away from that property. I'm not abandoning it. I have equity in it. I'm going to go to my bank and say, I can't make my payments. I may go into default. I'm going to hire a real estate professional to sell it. I'm going to pay off the loan, and then I have my equity left of it. And so this massive forced selling is really what was happening from 2008 to 2011, and it just the conditions don't exist for that right now because of the equity.
Most people in this country could not go out and rent an apartment for what their mortgage payment is. The homes that aren't going to default, those. Yeah. Right. They're going to do everything in their power to keep that. So it's more clickbait or whatever you want to say in that. But I think if the point here is having the confidence from knowing this so that you can step into a conversation and say, this is exactly what's happening in the market. Yeah. That's the difference maker right now.
I'm curious from both of you too. You were talking about committed versus interested. It applies to professionals, but it also applies to the consumer. So I'm curious as what you're seeing is if you're a real estate professional right now and the consumer who's dipping their toe into buying or dipping their toe into selling. I mean, again, for most of us, our compensation is tied to having a successful closing, not a successful working with a buyer or seller. So, what are some of the things you're seeing right now out there because the market is shifting and changing where consumers haven't caught up to it and they may not be as committed as the agent is. And I always say that's a danger, right? As an agent, if I'm more interested in getting your property sold or finding you a property than you are, that's usually a recipe where it's not going to work out.
Yeah, I think the biggest issue we've got right now is agents that are not willing to say no. And because one of the biggest things is we need to be focused in on the people that need to and truly are committed and really want to. Because those that are just testing the market right now, they're literally going to waste the agent's time because there's not going to be a successful sale here. And it's also going to give them, it pulls them away from the opportunity to help those that really need the help. Right. And so what I would just say is from an agent's perspective is begin to understand who it is that truly needs to sell is willing to do what it takes, and someone that you have the ability to lead to a closing. The best agent to be is to be the second listing agent.
Yeah.
Because the market has tenderized them. So if you're sitting in a listing appointment and you know that it's not there, one of the things that we did, we talked a little bit about this language, which I'd gotten from a friend of mine, Brad McCallum. He goes in and he talks about, when he goes in, he kind of does like, hey, I want to give you a little behind the scenes. Have you ever heard of the term buying the listing? Which is a great term, and basically what it is he says, well, most people don't, because it's kind of something we do as realtors. And it's where you go in and you take a listing and they will tell you that they will list for your price or they can get your price, but they won't tell you that 30 days from now they anticipate they're going to come to you and ask you for that price reduction. So what I want to do is I want to give you the information in a way that you can make the best decision for you and your family. But also, this is a two-way street. I want to make sure that it's something that I can successfully do. I'd rather disappoint you now than disappoint you later. And
that's what I said on my first day with my wife. I'd rather disappoint you now than later.
That's right. And here we are.
Yeah, right.
I know. So I just think finding the people that are committed. And if you're going to be a committed professional, you need to find the committed buyers and sellers that you can work with as well. Because when you do that, that's the combination that's going to lead to some transactions.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense.
Anything you want to add, David, as we
Well, I think
wrap up?
obviously, Jimmy, both of you are very close to the transaction now, and I'm further away. But I think this is a market that you have to understand the seller and the buyer's motivation. Because if there's not a driving motivation in this market, then you're probably not a serious seller or buyer. And then the other thing I would say is, if I was going to sit down in a buyer consult or in a listing presentation, a seller consult, I would have a list of questions that I want to be bulletproof on, which is, hey, the dynamics of rising inventory and price in our market. I would come up with those, and I would answer those eloquently with my client, and I would tell that client, anybody that you interview, ask them these questions.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's going to set you apart as the expert, as knowledge broker, all those things. And I think this is the market, again, that in the last decade, we're probably in the best time to be that professional than we've been in a long time.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, this has been great. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, David. Listen, I know that you got some value out of this. The key that we're all talking about is be the professional with the opinion that gives you the ability to base it on facts. As David talked about, have it where it is bulletproof when you walk in there, that you've got the confidence that you're giving them the best advice possible, and everything else will take care of itself. Thanks, and we'll talk to you guys soon.